people on Trayvon Martin's side, from his community, they backed his side, and they said that's not true. This George Zimmerman, he's a gun-happy guy, and he just, he saw Trayvon Martin. He didn't like Trayvon Martin, and maybe because of the race he was, who knows. And he just shot Trayvon Martin, even though Trayvon Martin was innocent. He was unarmed. So this was the argument. George Zimmerman claimed we were fighting, he was hitting me, and I shot him to protect myself. The others said, no, you're a murderer. You just shot him because you saw him and you didn't like him. So what they did was they analyzed the gunpowder residue on Trayvon Martin. They realized there was gunshot powder. He was very close. They were actually fighting hand to hand. And by the way, the gunshot powder was all over Trayvon Martin. So they exonerated George Zimmerman because the gunshot powder, and again, this is unbiased evidence as far as we know, he actually was telling the truth. And he didn't just, see Trayvon Martin and he fired at him from, let's say, 4 or 5 feet away. Unfortunately, George Zimmerman was a Caucasian, a white Caucasian, and Trayvon Martin was a black African-American, and therefore people were not satisfied with this, and they were very unhappy with this verdict, even though the forensic evidence actually did point to the fact that he was innocent, or at least innocent of just shooting him from because he didn't like him. Anyway, so this is true for ordinary guns, but for shotguns, it's not just the gunpowder. It's the shot itself that spreads out. And we can tell by the way the shot spread outward, depending on the gauge and the ammunition. If you know the gauge, you know the ammunition, and we see how far the shot spread outward, we can actually find where the original shooter was. With that, if you don't know the weapon, you just assume it's a regular shotgun, like the average shotgun used in that area. You can probably estimate how from the spread where it was, but the real way to do it is to test either the suspect shotgun and see how the shot spreads out from there, or to get the same exact kind of shotgun and same exact shotgun shell, shoot that off and see how that spreads, and from there we can tell from the spread of the crime scene where the shooter was. So again, this helps us get to reconstruct the crime. This is not a gunpowder, it's more of a shot method, but it's the same kind of idea. So we mentioned gunpowder residue. You can find it on clothing, not just the hand. And sometimes we can see the gunpowder, what looks like gunpowder residue. So you put that in. So you test that. See if it's gunpowder to make sure that this dark spots would be gunpowder. Sometimes the victim is not the victim, or the perpetrator is just not wearing a conveniently white shirt, so you can't pick it up. So you suspect it's there, but you don't know. So what they do very often is they take an IR photo that's like using infrared light, and they get a picture using from what infrared light hits and gets reflected back. So the fabric colors won't be seen, but gunpowder residue will show up because infrared radiation that hits it and gets reflected, it does pick up gunpowder residue, especially if it's the right kind of infrared light. So you can see it, even though not with your eye, you can see it with this IR photograph. Sometimes if it doesn't show anything, because it's not much of it, then you can use a chemical test. The simple test, the classic test, is the Grice test, where it tests for nitrite. And again, this comes from gunpowder. So if, let's say, the person fired it and his shirt sleeve was right there, we test the shirt sleeve, and we don't see it with the IR photograph, let's say. We take the shirt sleeve, we take photographic paper. It's not the kind that light will turn black. It's photographic paper that was already changed so that it won't turn black in light. So it's photographic paper. You take a fabric that has and you iron the fabric. They actually use cheesecloth or even cheese paper. The stuff that we use for cheese and it separates one slice of cheese from another. Anyway, they use that kind of thing. They used a hot iron on it. They sprayed it. You might have used a hot iron before. you spray water on your clothing and maybe starch, then you iron it, and your clothing turns out flat. But anyway, this thing does not use water to spray on the garment. What this does is it sprays acetate, an acetate solution, onto the paper, and whatever it is, onto the paper. And by the way, they also can soak this paper in acetate solution. They originally did that, or you can just use the iron and spray it on the paper, and then put this paper on top of your cloth. This is the suspect cloth. Iron it, and the residue, iron nitride, will show up as brown stains. So if you have that, there was probably gunpowder there, because you have the nitride. So again, that is something that can be used to show that this person committed the crime. They also have the sodium rhodizonate test for lead. This test for lead, not nitrite. And this is a little bit better because nitrites occur elsewhere. In any event, lead is pretty much only from bullets. Not much. We don't really handle much with lead. So anyway, this test for lead from the bullet, and these are trace amounts of it. So what you do is you spray the gunshot area, let's say his sleeve, I don't know, or wherever we suspect the gunshot powder, the gun smoke got to. We spray it with sodium rhodizonate, and if there's lead there, it'll show up as pink. To confirm this, they put an HCl solution, and this will turn purple once they take it. Very often they spray this onto the shirt, onto the sleeve. They take a Q-tip that's been soaked in an HCl solution, and they wipe that on the part that turned pink. And if that turns purple, then that's a confirmation that yes, there was lead there, and this person can be, or this shirt at least, can be connected to the gun and the gunshot that fired and that committed the crime. We also test people's hands. Again, the primer, the smoke from the primer and the gunpowder leaves a residue on the hands. So this often spreads to the palms also, because again, the palm is what grips the gun, and the top of it is what the gunpowder will get all over. So we can check for trace amounts of SB. That's antimony, lead also, and barium. These come from the primer. They also come from the bullet to a certain extent. But anyway, let's say they come from the primer. They stick on the hands. They stick for some time, but more than 6 hours, they might have gotten brushed off. They might have gotten wiped off. Maybe they flaked off. Whatever it might have been. After 6 hours, a negative result from a test doesn't prove anything. Originally, what they used to do is, as soon as they caught, they took wax. They put wax all over the suspect's hands. When it dried, they tested the wax for nitrate. They used diphenylamine to test for it. The problem with testing for nitrate is that fertilizer contains nitrate. So maybe this just proves he handled ammonium nitrate, for example, as a fertilizer. He might have handled ammonium nitrate fertilizer. Even urine sometimes can actually eventually produce nitrate. So nitrates are not the best way to test for gunpowder residue. Test for antimony, lead, and barium. These often come from bullets, and specifically bullets, or from the primer. And this is better because, generally speaking, people do not have this in their environment, so they would not pick it up. So if your test shows that the person had it, that is a good indication that he was there firing the gun, and then he didn't just pick it up from who knows where, because you usually don't pick these things up from normal environments. There are some difficulties, though. So because he might have been a hunter. I mean, you're allowed to hunt, at least in this country, in some places, many places. So he